Selvera stumbled through the cold, barren wasteland of the desolate moon. Her body was weak, her vision blurry, and every step felt heavier than the last. She had not fed in days. The last battle had gone terribly wrong, and now she was alone, abandoned and dying. Her species, the Nixari, survived by consuming life force energy from other beings. Without it, their bodies withered away. The Nixari saw themselves as superior predators, and humans were nothing more than prey. But now she was the one struggling to survive, ironic and cruel. She collapsed onto the rocky ground, her breath shallow. The scent of iron filled the air, her own blood. Her wounds refused to heal without fresh energy. The hunger clawed at her insides like a beast. Then, through the haze of pain, she heard footsteps. Selvera forced her eyes open, expecting to see another Nixari coming to finish her off. Instead, she saw something far worse, a human. The man stood at a distance, holding a rifle, his posture tense but not aggressive. His rough jacket was covered in dust, and his piercing blue eyes studied her carefully. She recognized his kind, a scavenger, someone who collected whatever was left after a battle. Her first instinct was to attack, to drain him of his life force, but she couldn't even lift her arm. The man sighed and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Damn it, you look half dead." Selvera let out a weak snarl. "Leave, human." The man ignored her warning. He knelt beside her, pulling out a small medkit from his pack. "You're not in a position to make demands, lady." She flinched when he touched her, expecting pain, but instead she felt warmth. He pressed a sterilized bandage against one of her wounds, stopping the bleeding. His hands were careful, practiced. He had done this before. Why? Selvera didn't understand. No human had ever shown mercy to a Nixari before. He should have left her to die, or worse, killed her himself. Why? "Help me?" she whispered, her voice weak. The man shrugged. "I don't like watching people die, even blood-sucking aliens like you." She stared at him, confused. Was this a trick? A trap? He pulled out a small ration pack and placed it beside her. "You should eat something." Selvera let out a dry laugh, her fangs glinting under the dim light. "Food won't help me." The man frowned, realizing what she meant. "You need life force to heal, don't you?" She nodded weakly. Instead of backing away in fear, the man sighed again, rolling up his sleeve. "All right, just don't overdo it." Selvera's red eyes widened in shock. For the first time in her life, a human was offering his life force instead of running from her. She didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Selvera stared at the human's bare wrist, her red eyes wide with disbelief. Was this a trick? No human had ever willingly offered their life force to a Nixari before. Her body screamed for energy. The hunger burned inside her, twisting her insides like a knife. She had no choice. If she didn't feed, she would die. But could she trust him? The human, Daniel Carter, sat beside her, his expression calm. "Well, you need it, right?" He wiggled his fingers impatiently. "Go on before I change my mind." Selvera hesitated. This man was either a fool or the bravest human she had ever met. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached for his wrist. The moment her cold fingers touched his warm skin, she felt the pulse of his life force, strong, steady, full of energy. Her fangs ached with need, her instincts urging her to take everything. Daniel didn't flinch, but his muscles tensed. "Is this gonna hurt?" Selvera smirked weakly. "Depends. How much I take." She lowered her lips to his wrist and sank her fangs in gently. The moment his energy entered her body, she gasped. Warmth flooded her veins, healing her injuries, washing away the pain. It was like breathing after drowning. Daniel let out a sharp breath, his fingers digging into the rocky ground. "That's a weird feeling." Selvera drank just enough to stop the hunger, but not too much. If she took too much, he would weaken or even die. Finally, she pulled away, licking the wound to seal it. A human's blood was different, richer, stronger than any other species she had ever tasted. She leaned back, breathing heavily, her body already feeling stronger. Daniel flexed his fingers, looking at his wrist. "Ha! Didn't even leave a scar." Selvera frowned. "You're not afraid." He chuckled. "I mean, a little. But if you wanted to kill me, you would have done it already." Selvera had no response to that. He was right. Any other Nixari would have drained him dry. But she had stopped herself. "Why?" Daniel stood up and stretched. "All right, now that you're not dying, you should get some rest." Selvera narrowed her eyes. "You helped me. What do you want in return?" He raised an eyebrow. "Nothing." She scoffed. "Humans don't do things for free." Daniel gave her a small smile. "Maybe I'm not like other humans." Selvera watched him as he walked back toward his small camp. He was different, strange, illogical, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see a human as prey. She saw something else entirely. Selvera sat against the cold rock wall, her body still recovering from the life force she had taken from the human. Her wounds were healing, her mind clearer, but one thing still confused her, Daniel. He had given her his energy without fear, without asking for anything in return. Why? What kind of human did that? She watched as he sat by a small makeshift fire, tinkering with a damaged energy rifle. He had set up a simple camp in the ruins of an old supply station, with a few ration packs and a single blanket draped over a crate. He lived like a survivor, not a soldier. Selvera's curiosity got the better of her. "Why are you here, human?" Her voice was steadier now, no longer weak. Daniel didn't look up. "You ask a lot of questions for someone I just staved." She narrowed her eyes. "I don't trust you." He smirked. "Good. I don't trust you either." For a moment, they just stared at each other, predator and prey. But somehow, neither. Finally, Daniel sighed and leaned back. "I used to be a soldier. I fought in the war against your kind." Selvera tensed. Of course, a human soldier. A man who had likely killed many of her people. "So why help me?" she asked, suspicion in her tone. Daniel stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "Because I got tired of killing." His words surprised her. Humans were fighters, warriors, always struggling to prove their strength. But this man, he seemed different. Selvera shifted, feeling the hunger inside her finally fade. Her strength was returning. She could leave now, disappear before more humans arrived. But something held her back. Daniel glanced at her. "What about you? Why did your people leave you behind?" Selvera's jaw tightened. She didn't want to talk about it. But looking at him, this strange, fearless human who had risked his own energy to save her, she felt something unfamiliar. A need to explain. She hesitated before answering. "I lost the fight. My kind doesn't keep the weak." Daniel let out a slow breath. Sounds like a terrible way to live. Selvera looked away. Was it? For her whole life, she had believed in strength, that the weak were nothing, discarded like broken tools. But now, for the first time, she saw a different way of thinking, a different way of surviving. Daniel tossed her a ration pack. "You should eat something. Even if it's not life force, it'll help." Selvera caught it, staring at him. This human, he didn't see her as a monster. He saw her as something more. And that scared her more than anything. Selvera sat in silence, staring at the ration pack in her hands. A human had saved her life. Not just any human, a former soldier, someone who had fought against her kind. And yet he had given her his own life force, expecting nothing in return. It made no sense. She opened the pack, sniffing the contents. Dry, tasteless human food. It wouldn't nourish her, but she forced herself to eat a little. Daniel watched her carefully, as if studying a dangerous animal. Finally, she spoke. "You should have let me die." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's gratitude for you." Selvera sighed, rubbing her temples. You don't understand, human. If my people know I survived, they will come for me. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. Then let them come. She narrowed her eyes. You don't get it. The Nixari don't leave survivors. I am a weakness to them now. If they find me, they will kill me. Daniel shrugged. You say that like I should be scared. Selvera frowned. She had seen human soldiers before, ruthless, efficient killers. But this one was different. He had a calm confidence, as if he had already accepted whatever dangers lay ahead. Then suddenly, a beep from his wrist device. Daniel checked the screen, his jaw tightening. Looks like we have a problem. Selvera sat up. What? He turned the screen toward her. A distress signal. A Nixari code. Her blood ran cold. They're coming. Daniel stood, grabbing his rifle. How long do we have? Selvera focused, closing her eyes. Nixari had strong senses. She reached out with her mind, feeling the presence of her kind. Less than an hour. Daniel cursed under his breath. That's enough time to prepare. Selvera's eyes widened. Prepare? You mean fight? He smirked. You think I'm just going to roll over and let them take you? Selvera couldn't believe it. This human was willing to stand against the Nixari. For her. She shook her head. You're insane. Daniel chuckled, loading his weapon. Maybe. But I've fought worse. Selvera stared at him. He was serious. He was really going to help her. For the first time, she felt something strange. Not fear, not hunger, but trust. She stood up, her strength returning. Fine. If you're going to fight, then I fight too. Daniel grinned. Now you're talking. As they prepared for the coming battle, Selvera realized something. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting because, for the first time in her life, someone believed she was worth saving. Selvera stood beside Daniel, her body tense, as she listened to the distant hum of approaching Nixari ships. They were coming, her own kind, but they weren't here to save her. Daniel, calm as ever, checked his rifle. How many? Selvera closed her eyes, focusing her senses. A cold shiver ran down her spine. At least 5. Maybe more. Daniel smirked. I've handled worse. She gave him an annoyed look. You don't understand. These are hunters, elite warriors. They don't stop until their target is dead. Daniel shrugged. Then we just have to make sure their target isn't us. Selvera watched him in disbelief. How could he be so fearless? Humans were supposed to be weak, prey to stronger species. Yet this one acted like he had already won the fight before it even started. She crossed her arms. You're either the bravest human I've met, or the dumbest. Daniel grinned. Probably both. Selvera sighed. We can't fight them head-on. We need a plan. Daniel nodded. All right, then let's use the terrain. We know this place better than they do. Together, they moved through the ruins of the old outpost. Daniel set up traps, rigging old power cells to explode if triggered. Selvera scouted the best hiding spots, preparing for an ambush. She still didn't know why she was doing this. She should have run. Let the human deal with his own foolishness. But something stopped her. She looked at Daniel, focused and determined, working to protect her as if she was one of his own. No one had ever done that for her before. The sound of engines grew louder. The Nixari had arrived. Daniel crouched behind cover, gripping his weapon. Showtime. Selvera's heart pounded. For the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. Selvera crouched behind the ruins of the old outpost, her breath steady, her senses sharp. The Nixari hunters had arrived. She peeked around the corner and spotted them. 5 figures in dark armor, moving with precision. Their glowing red eyes scanned the area, searching for her. One of them, a tall Nixari with jagged black markings, spoke in a sharp, cold voice. She's here. I can smell her. Daniel, crouched beside her, whispered, Charming friends you've got. Selvera's jaw tightened. They're not my friends. If they find me, they will kill me." Daniel smirked, gripping his rifle. "Then we make sure they don't." The first Nixari stepped forward, scanning the area with a small tracking device. Suddenly, the scanner beeped. They had found something. Boom! A trap exploded, sending fire and debris into the air. 2 of the Nixari were thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. Daniel chuckled. "Told you traps work." The remaining Nixari didn't panic. Instead, they moved quickly, adjusting their formation. One of them spotted Daniel and fired a plasma shot. He barely dodged, rolling behind cover. Selvera growled. "They're adapting fast." Daniel grinned. "So we just have to be faster." He fired back, hitting one Nixari in the shoulder. The alien hissed in pain but didn't go down. Selvera knew they couldn't win with weapons alone. She had to use her own strength. Before Daniel could stop her, she launched herself forward with inhuman speed, tackling one of the hunters. Her claws slashed across his chest, drawing dark blood. The hunter gasped, eyes wide. "You dare betray your own kind." Selvera's fangs gleamed. "I was never your kind." She sank her claws deeper, ending him. Another Nixari rushed at her from behind, but Daniel took him down with a clean headshot. Selvera turned to him, surprised. This human was fighting for her, not against her. Only one Nixari remained, the leader. He glared at Selvera, eyes filled with hatred. "You think this is over? More will come." Selvera's hands curled into fists. "Let them." Daniel stepped beside her, rifle still aimed. "We'll be ready." The Nixari hissed and vanished into the shadows, retreating. The battle was won, but Selvera knew this was only the beginning. She looked at Daniel, breathing heavily. "Why did you fight for me?" He wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Because you're not my enemy." Selvera had spent her entire life seeing humans as prey. But now, she wasn't so sure. Maybe, just maybe, they were something more. The smoke from the battle still hung in the air as Selvera and Daniel stood amidst the wreckage of the outpost. The sound of the last Nixari retreating echoed in the distance, but they both knew it wasn't over. The leader's words still rang in Selvera's mind. More would come. She took a deep breath, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through her body. She had killed her own kind, betrayed everything she had been taught to believe. Daniel wiped his rifle clean and looked at her, his face tired but resolute. "You okay?" Selvera didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the blood on her hands, blood that belonged to her people who saw her as a traitor now. "I should leave." The words felt strange even as she said them. "I should run and never look back." Daniel didn't respond immediately, just staring at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not going anywhere." Selvera glanced up sharply. "What?" He took a step toward her, his voice calm but firm. "You're not leaving. You don't need to run anymore. You've fought for your life, and you've earned it. You're staying with me." She shook her head, disbelief clouding her thoughts. "I can't stay. My people will hunt me down, Daniel. You've seen what they can do." "I've also seen what you can do," Daniel replied, his tone low but confident. "And I've seen you change." Selvera's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't want to hear this, didn't want to admit it, but there was truth in his words. Something inside her had shifted. She had chosen to fight, to save him, to protect them both. She had chosen humanity over her own kind, and it terrified her. She took a step back, as if putting distance between them would make her decision easier. "I've never had a choice before. My people don't give me the luxury of choice." Daniel's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Selvera saw something in him that she had never expected. Sympathy. "You've always had a choice, Selvera," he said gently. "It just took you this long to see it." She didn't know what to say to that. The human before her was nothing like what she had expected. He was not afraid of her, not afraid to stand by her. He didn't see her as a monster. He saw her as a person. And maybe, just maybe, she could be that. But there was still the question of the Nixari. If she stayed, they would come for both of them. They had no idea how dangerous her decision was. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what this means. If I stay, you'll be in danger. We both will." Daniel's voice grew firmer. "I know exactly what it means. It means we fight." He stepped closer, now only a few inches away from her. "You're not alone, Selvera. And you don't have to be anymore." For the first time, Selvera felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. She looked into Daniel's eyes, and for the first time she didn't see a human and a Nixari. She saw two people standing side by side, ready to face the unknown together. And in that moment, she realized Daniel was right. She did have a choice. A dangerous choice, but it was hers to make. The moon was quiet now, the battle over. The smoke had cleared, leaving a silence that felt almost too heavy. Daniel and Selvera sat near the campfire, the crackling flames casting shadows across their tired faces. Selvera stared into the fire, her mind racing. She had made her choice, but the weight of it pressed on her chest like a stone. She had betrayed her kind. She had killed. And yet she didn't feel like the monster she had always been told she was. In fact, she felt lighter. There was a peace inside her now, something she hadn't known for years. She glanced over at Daniel, who was sharpening his knife. He didn't look tired at all, despite everything they had just gone through. His expression was steady, focused. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something else. He was her partner. Her thoughts were interrupted as Daniel spoke, his voice breaking the quiet. "So, what now?" Selvera hesitated, unsure of how to answer. What now? The Nixari would never forgive her. They would come for her with even more force than before. And the humans, they would never accept her. She had been taught to believe that humans were weak, nothing more than prey. But now, standing here with Daniel, she realized just how wrong she had been. She didn't have to hide anymore. She looked back at Daniel. "We stay and fight. Together." He raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. I liked the sound of that. There was something about the way he said it, so confident, so sure. He didn't see her as a threat, a danger to him. He saw her as an ally, as a friend, maybe even something more. Daniel stood up, his movements fluid, as if the battle had never happened. He stretched, his muscles taut. "We've got work to do. The Nixari won't just give up. We need to make sure we're ready." Selvera nodded, her heart racing at the thought of what was coming. "We'll have to be smart." Daniel grinned, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "We have to be a little more than smart. We have to be ready for anything." The next few hours were spent preparing. They set more traps, mapped out escape routes, and discussed how they would deal with the coming threat. Selvera felt more alive than she had in a long time. For the first time, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was fighting for something. The bond between her and Daniel grew stronger with every plan they made, every step they took to prepare for the battle ahead. There was a shared understanding between them, an unspoken promise. They would stand together, no matter what. As the night wore on, Selvera sat beside him, looking up at the stars. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of her past bearing down on her. She didn't feel like a predator or prey. She felt like a person, a human and an alien, standing side by side. Daniel looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "Tomorrow's going to be tough, but we'll face it together, right?" Selvera met his gaze and nodded. Together. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The following morning, Selvera and Daniel stood at the edge of the old outpost, looking out over the desolate landscape. The sun hummed low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked surface of the moon. Selvera's heart pounded in her chest. The Nixari were coming. She could feel their presence, their ships approaching in the distance. This would be the fight that determined everything: her future, her survival, and the life she had chosen with Daniel. Daniel checked his rifle, his movements smooth and practiced. He had become more than just her ally. He was her partner, someone who had given her a chance when no one else would. And now she was ready to fight for him just as he had fought for her. "They'll come from the north," Selvera said, her voice calm, despite the storm of thoughts in her mind. "They won't take the same route as last time. They'll try to outsmart us." Daniel nodded. "Then we outsmart them first." They had spent hours the night before preparing. They had set traps, planned ambush points, and created escape routes. But now, all they had was each other and their determination to survive. The sound of engines reached them. The Nixari were close. Selvera's eyes narrowed as she looked into the distance, her sharp senses picking up the vibration of their ships. "Get ready," she said, her voice low. Daniel gave her a quick glance, his face serious. "I'm ready." Selvera moved silently, using her speed to slip into the shadows of the broken outpost. Daniel followed closely behind, his rifle at the ready. They would fight side by side, just as they had planned. The first Nixari appeared on the horizon, a group of heavily armored soldiers. They moved in formation, weapons raised, eyes scanning for any sign of their prey. Selvera's heart raced. This was it. With a signal from Daniel, they launched their first attack. Explosions rang out as Selvera activated the hidden traps, sending the Nixari soldiers flying in all directions. They were disoriented, confused, but still dangerous. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired with deadly accuracy, taking down one of the soldiers in an instant. The others began to return fire, but Selvera was already on them, her fangs bared and claws ready. She moved faster than the Nixari could react, taking down 2 more soldiers in a blur of motion. Her strength had grown, the energy she had absorbed from Daniel giving her an edge. But then, a tall figure stepped forward, the leader of the Nixari hunters. He was massive, towering over the others, his eyes glowing with anger. "You dare betray us, Selvera." His voice was cold, filled with venom. "You are a disgrace to your kind." Selvera's eyes narrowed. "I am no longer one of you." The leader snarled in charge. Selvera braced herself, ready for the battle of her life. The leader was powerful, his strikes brutal, but she was faster. They clashed in a whirlwind of violence, the sound of their battle echoing across the ruined outpost. Daniel fired from a distance, taking out a few more soldiers, but the leader was too focused on Selvera to notice him. The Nixari hunter was relentless, his movements precise and deadly. But Selvera wasn't backing down. She had made her choice. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't afraid. With a final roar, she plunged her claws into the leader's chest, ending his life in a single swift motion. The fight was over. Selvera stood, panting, her body covered in blood, both hers and her enemy's. She turned to Daniel, who was watching her with a mixture of awe and relief. "We did it," Daniel said, his voice soft but full of emotion. Selvera nodded, her chest rising and falling with every breath. "We did it." And for the first time, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't need to hide, didn't need to run. She had found something more than survival. She had found a partner. Together, they had survived the impossible. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The battlefield was silent now. The last of the Nixari hunters had been dealt with, their bodies scattered across the ruined outpost. The air, once filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions, was now still. The smoke had cleared, leaving only the faint scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. Selvera stood at the edge of the wreckage, her body bruised but unbroken. Her heart still raced from the fight, but the adrenaline was slowly fading, leaving behind a sense of exhaustion mixed with something she hadn't expected: relief. Beside her, Daniel was checking his rifle, ensuring it was in working order. He looked every bit the soldier, but there was something different about him now. He wasn't just a warrior. He was her partner, someone who had stood by her when no one else would. Selvera glanced at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You were right," she said softly. "We did it." Daniel looked up from his rifle and returned her smile, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. "I told you we'd make a good team." For a moment, they just stood there, taking in the aftermath of their victory. The battle had been hard, and many had fallen. But they were still here, together. Selvera felt the warmth in her chest, a feeling that had been absent for so long. She had never believed in anything outside of survival, never thought she would find anything worth fighting for. But now, as she stood beside Daniel, she realized that she had found something far more precious than survival. She had found a reason to live. "So, what now?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. His voice was curious, almost hopeful. Selvera turned to face him fully, her expression serious. She had spent her whole life running, hiding, being hunted. But now she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't alone. "Now we live," she said. Daniel nodded, his smile widening. "Live. Together." The thought of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: they would face it together. The Nixari might still come, but Selvera wasn't afraid. She had fought for her life, and she had chosen this path, a path that didn't lead to death, but to a new beginning. She looked around at the desolate landscape, then back at Daniel. "We can't stay here. They'll know we're still alive. We'll need to find somewhere new, somewhere safe." Daniel agreed, already looking at the sky, scanning for any signs of more threats. "We'll find a place. We'll start fresh." Selvera's heart beat a little faster. Starting fresh wasn't something she had ever imagined for herself. She had never thought she'd get a second chance. But here she was, with Daniel, standing on the edge of a new life. And this time, she wasn't alone. "Together," she repeated, more to herself than to Daniel. "Let's make it happen." With that, they turned toward the horizon. The future was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, Selvera knew they could face anything. Together. And for the first time in her life, she believed in the possibility of a future beyond survival. A future where she wasn't just fighting for her life, but for something much more. Something worth living for.